there are so many parts of your dad's character in you, clearly. I mean, do you feel that? Did you, when you wrote this obituary, did you feel that really quite intensely?
Well, you know, you pointed to that detail with regards to these rifles. Like, my father had 300 rifles. This was a real obsession, and he was a very good shot. He was a provincial level shot. And it took me 30 years to figure out why the hell he collected those guns. I don't think he knew. And I told him 5 years ago, I said, Dad, I figured out why you're so obsessed with rifles. I said, it's because you want to hit the target dead center with one shot. And that's like, it's a symbolic representation of your aim in life. And he thought about that. And my dad wasn't particularly metaphysically oriented. And that was an explanation he was entirely satisfied with. Right? And you know, the word sin means to miss the mark, right? It means to miss the target. And that's acted out in this, it was acted out in my dad's life in this relationship that he had with guns. And he, as a hunter, it was the same thing. He hunted with a single shot rifle. You got one shot, you got one chance to hit the mark. And he was very dedicated towards that kind of precision. That was part of what gave him that rough edge. He had very high standards, a very encouraging person. He believed that, he imbued me with the belief that I could do anything I set my mind to, but that didn't make him someone who was easy to please. Quite the contrary. It was a very remarkable combination. And I was very fortunate, my father, you know, I knew, and my mother as well, my parents were 100% behind the best part of me. Unbelievably useful. And that's something I've been able to offer many people, you know, as, what would you say, an abstract or virtualized father, and that's a great honor.
But to lose both your parents in the space of 6 months at your age is a really, I'm very fortunate. Both my parents are still alive. I spent the weekend with them. It's a huge moment in your life, isn't it? How are you dealing with it?
Well, my brother and my sister were there with me when my father died. And, you know, we've drawn more closely together in consequence of that. It's shared loss. And I saw that happen with Tammy when her mom and dad died, that her family drew together, and Tammy, for example, established a much better relationship with her older brother, and that was not a substitute for her father, obviously, but a very positive alternative. And so we've found solace in each other, my sister and my brother, and drawn more closely together, and that's been very good. And none of us are naive, you know. I mean, our parents were getting old, and I would say we were also fortunate in some ways. My mother was very vital, right? Literally till the day she died. She had a heart attack, and then 2 days later another, but she was a young and vivacious person despite being in her 80s, and then bowed out with no fuss and very suddenly. And my father as well, you know, I mean, I've watched people deteriorate for sometimes decades in old folks' homes, and both my parents departed from life in a relatively, what would you say, in a relatively suffering-free manner, and so we're grateful for that. And it is a terrible thing to see someone that you love die, and there's always the sense that you have that there was perhaps more that you could have done. You know, I wonder, I suppose, in an ultimate sense, whether the fact that we die is in some way the ultimate moral failure. I mean, that's a preposterous thing to think, but that's the sort of thought that plagues you when you see someone that you love die. But they lived good lives, and they were probably both in some ways ready to go. And so it was far less terrible than it might have been. And I was fortunate to be surrounded by people who, instead of making it hell, did everything they could to make it better. And I have drawn closer to my brother and sister in consequence, and I suspect that will continue. And I told my father that very shortly before he died. You know, one of the things I did, Pierce, that maybe the people who are listening would be interested in is, like, probably 15 years ago, I counted all the times I would see my parents before they died. And it was about 15 times at that point, because I saw them about twice a year or something like that, because we lived quite distant. I phoned them and so on. But, it's very useful to take stock and to understand that, as your parents age, the number of times that you see them decreases very dramatically. And you need to know that, because then you don't waste the time when you have it. And I don't think we wasted the time that we had together. I took my mother to Australia on the tour with me, and to Iceland, and she had a very good adventure. And I spent a lot of time with my dad. So neither my sister, my brother, and I, we really didn't come to the end of our parents' lives with regrets, thank God. This new Trump administration.
They're calling it the Avengers.
You're a fool if you're going to predict the outcome of that. He has Musk. He has RFK, Ramaswamy. These are formidable people. These aren't people who need the political power. Those are the people you surround yourself with if you're out on a quest. Putin will hold himself in check until Trump takes power, and that the war will come to a rapid end. I'm strapped in for the ride. My father, he died recently. Man with very high standards.
My deepest condolences.
I think I remember mostly reading with you.
That was so much fun.
I thought so.
I can see how moved you are. You say here he could be fearsome.
Pierce, you always make me cry when you interview me.
Do you believe in God? Do you think there is a heaven?
The problem is there's a whole literature that Richard Dawkins knows nothing about. Go to hell. You're not stopping me.
Well, the last time I interviewed the world's most famous psychologist, he unpacked with incisive clarity the reasons why Americans should trust Donald Trump over Kamala Harris. Clearly, America agreed. And when it comes to Dr. Jordan Peterson, they often do. His books and tools have had a profound impact on 21st century culture. Now he's back to tackle the biggest subject of all in his new book, We Who Wrestle with God. The best-selling author, psychologist, and co-founder of the Peterson Academy joins me now. Jordan, great to have you back on Uncensored.
Hi, Pierce. Nice to see you.
I'm going to get to your book a little later, and it was utterly gripping, fascinating, challenging, all the things I'd expect from you. But before we move on and then come back to it, the reviews have been almost comical. Like, people love you or they hate you so much they want to rip you to pieces. Do you care? Or, because I get the same, we call it Marmite over here, which is a savoury thing you put on toast, which people either love or hate. Do you care, or do you just want people to be reacting?
Well, look, I mean, if you have any sense and people are paying attention to what you're doing, you're happy about the fact that they're paying attention to what you're doing. And then whether the attention is negative or positive, I suppose that's the next thing up on the agenda. And it's been a pattern through my life that people have that kind of reaction to what I'm doing, and luckily in my actual life, day to day, in the real world, virtually everybody I meet is pleased with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so that's wonderful. The reviews, as you said, have been comical. I was reading the Times review today.
Oh my God.
It's like,
he hates
James
you.
Marriott, he just hates me. Oh my God, he just hates me, yeah.
And what really got him, what I loved about that review was he was clearly, it was eating away at him that the last time one of your books came out, he said something positive that you then used in the marketing for the book, which is obviously what we all do as authors. And he was so determined this time you couldn't do that he wanted to address that right off the top. Right off the top.
Yeah, well, I did do it, though. I did do it. I tweeted out something today that I culled from his review to make it look very positive. So I thought that was hilarious, because it wasn't easy, because there wasn't much in it that was positive, but I thought that would really rub him the wrong way.
Oh, it would enrage him. Well, we'll come back to the book. It's fascinating, the book, and I really want to get into that with you a little later. But I want to talk to you, just first of all, I want to play you a clip. This is from when you and I did an interview just after the start of the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Let's take a look at this. Do you think he will use a nuclear weapon?
If necessary, he'll use a tactical battlefield weapon.
Even if it starts World War III?
It won't. Probably.
Why? Because we wouldn't respond?
What's in it for us?
If you let him do it and get away with it, where does that end? Then you are into a Hitler analogy.
Look, there's a lot. You can get yourself in a situation, no problem, where there's no good outcome.
I mean, here we are, Jordan. We're 2 years later. We're in a stalemate. Putin is still rattling his nuclear weapons as a threatening back off pretty menacing device. He's done that a few times and then not acted on it, but things are clearly very tense there. And there's a change coming in the presidency in America, which could be crucial as well. Where do you think we are with this war? Are we any better off or towards any kind of clarity or ending than we were when you and I spoke back then?
Well, I thought a week ago that the most likely outcome with regard to the outgoing Biden administration is that the military-industrial complex, who has a vested interest in seeing this war prolonged, would do something to provoke Russia into doing something that was unforgivable so that the war would have to continue. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly, now I could be wrong, but that seems to me to be exactly what's happened this week. I mean, Biden, in the dying embers of his administration, decided that it was okay for Ukraine to use medium to long-range missiles, which is a hell of a thing to do as an outgoing president. And now they've also proposed that it will be acceptable for Ukraine to use a certain kind of distributable landmine. And it's like, this is independent of what you think about the war, as far as I'm concerned. It's like, really, is that what you do? That's the steps you take as a dead duck president in the final months of your administration. I think that's a little bit on the provocative side. Now, my sense is that Putin will hold himself in check until Trump takes power, and that the war will come to a relatively rapid end soon thereafter. I don't know. I'm not a foreign policy expert, and the world's a very unpredictable place. But if I had to bet, that's what I would bet on, and I think it's a highly probable outcome. So we'll see. I mean, everything's up in the air, obviously, Pierce. This new administration, this new Trump administration, God only knows what is going to happen with Musk involved and Vivek Ramaswamy and J.D. Vance and Mehmet Oz and RFK. I mean, you're a fool if you're going to predict the outcome of that.
What do you make of it? I mean, they're calling it the Avengers. What do you make of his picks? I mean, most of them are causing surprise. I'm not massively surprised because I think Trump tried the first time to do things in a more conventional way, and he felt that just didn't work for him. He's now had 4 years out of office to really think about it, and he's come back in and he's just hit the ground with people that he thinks are going to be basically very loyal, and then they're going to be quite disruptive in the way they go about their business. And he thinks that kind of disruptive, blunt instrument is actually exactly what America needs right now.
Well, I think what's happened fundamentally is that these remarkable people that have aggregated themselves around Trump understand very thoroughly that we're in a time of unprecedented rate of change. And I think that's pretty obvious to everyone, and that there are immense opportunities awaiting us and immense perils. And they're sufficiently concerned about the perils and sufficiently compelled by the opportunities to stake themselves politically and to take the risk of doing so. You know, people like Musk in particular, but Ramaswamy's in the same boat, essentially. These aren't people, and many of the other people around Trump, these aren't people who need the political power. Right. They already have lives. They're already have immense influence. I mean, for Musk to involve himself in the Department of Governmental Efficiency is obviously something that's taking him away from many other things that he's highly concerned about. But he obviously believes that the time demands that kind of response. And I think he's right. And, you know, more power to them. I'm strapped in for the ride as far as I'm concerned. Thought that what happened around Trump in the last 2 months of the election was absolutely remarkable, that these people aggregated themselves around him, and we're in for unprecedented times. And like, the Americans are remarkable people, and you're always a fool to bet against them. And I think we have a good chance of seeing a revival of the American spirit that is unprecedented in our times. For example, it's a truism among cosmologists that the laws of time and space, the laws of science, break down at the singularity. And there's no difference between saying that and saying something that we can't explain from within the confines of our materialist understanding emerged at the origin to bring all things into being. there's a miracle lurking in there somewhere. And of course, the biologists are also stuck with the problem of the origin of life, which they hand wave about constantly, but have been completely unable to account for. And so my friend Jonathan Pajot, you know, his insistence is that if he's going to accept a miracle, he'll accept the miracle that proclaims that the cosmos itself is founded on sacrifice. And that's a completely different framework of conceptualization that I unpack to a large degree in my book, because you can make a very strong case that perception itself is a sacrificial endeavor. And so Dawkins' metaphysics is very narrowly empirical and very narrowly enlightenment. And part of the problem with that is that there are also just things that Dawkins doesn't know. And I would say in his favor, and in the favor of our discussion, is that near the end of that discussion, we did have a meeting of minds, because we started to talk about how the evolution of narrative in the manner that he represented as memes could have a long-term effect on the genetic evolution of humanity. And he got very excited about that. And I was thrilled about that, because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Dawkins is because I think some of his ideas, especially the idea of meme, has far more significance than he thinks it does.
Right.
Now, part of the problem is there's a whole literature that Richard Dawkins knows nothing about. So, for example, he doesn't know anything about the work of a man named Mircea Eliade, who's was the preeminent historian of religion for years. He's out of favor in academia because he's not a postmodern, hedonistic, power-mad nihilist. And, you know, Eliade was one of those people who thinks that there was something fundamental about the structure of mythology and narrative. And Dawkins doesn't know anything about that entire field of endeavor. And that's a major problem, given that he's also very concerned with the evolution of our ability to abstract. And I was trying to move the discussion in that direction, and that happened very successfully near the end of it. So
there's a brilliant, in the Telegraph review, actually, of your book, there's a really good line there where they said Peterson's at his best when he brings alive the pathological behavior of the Bible's bad guys, from Cain to the whore of Babylon, by everyone who dawdles, resents, exhibits pride, worships false idols, complains, lies, accuses, wallows in victimhood, and fails to live up to their responsibilities or talents. It's all on you, he writes, with God as a guide. And I love that, because that was a big takeaway from the book for me, is, again, the way you take the text of the Bible, the Old Testament, but you make the point that if you bring it forward to today, all of those things there, you know, when I look at Trump's big win in America, for example, yes, it was to do with the economy and cost of living, no question. Yes, it was to do with the border crisis and people genuinely concerned about what's been going on there. But it was also, I felt, a real repudiation of what Elon Musk calls the woke mind virus in all its guises. That people have just basically had enough of what is, ironically, a kind of modern day fascism, the way they go about destroying people that don't sign up to their worldview. And all the things they kind of represent the woke brigade, for want of a better phrase, the wallowing in victimhood, you know, the constant whining and moaning about absolutely everything, the lack of taking personal responsibility, etc., etc. The kind of inherent laziness of so many of them as well. Very work shy, I've noticed. You put it all together and you've got all these things, all these themes from the Bible of things to avoid in the way you conduct yourself. They're in that mentality, that woke mind virus. It encourages that way of thinking. I mean, do you see a parallel there?
Well, we'll start with a practical parallel. I mean, the Trump election campaign was a great drama, and there was a kind of victimized femininity, let's say, on the Democrat side, with Kamala Harris and her cohorts really emblematic of that. And then what did we have on the Trump side? Well, one of the most dramatic portrayals, maybe the most dramatic portrayal of what we had on the Trump side, was Trump's response to being shot. It was like this.
Yeah.
Right? Go to hell. You're not stopping me, no matter what. And like, as Musk pointed out, that's not staged. And, you know, it was so interesting watching the victimized Democrat response to that, because their response was open-mouthed amazement that anything like that could even be possible. It must have been a hoax, because no one could possibly react like that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, wrong. Trump could react like that. And despite whatever faults he might have, that's what he's like. He got up and said, "You're not stopping me no matter what." And, you know, more power to him. And I don't think it's an overestimate to presume that that won him the election.
Totally
and
agree.
you can see the immense literary drama there.
You know what, Jordan? I've just written exactly that. I've done the Spectator magazine diary this week. And I said, when I think back, I spoke to Trump 4 times in the last few weeks of the race, including a week after he got shot, when he saw me talking about it on TV in America, and he called me. And we had a fascinating conversation. He said it had reinvigorated his faith in God, because he said God must have wanted me to survive. Because he said literally he was alive because he moved his head half an inch to read some charts on the teleprompter. And if he hadn't, he'd be dead. And secondly, that he, you know, I said to him, "Amazing you're back out doing rallies so soon." And he went, "Well, I knew if I didn't do it quickly, I may not ever do it," which I thought was one of the very few times I've seen any vulnerability for Trump. But of course but the balls, not just to stand back up when he got shot, to stand back up saying fight, 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 when he didn't know if there were other shooters out there. But secondly, to get back on a stage in front of 20,000 people, none of whom you know, a week later, and to keep doing it, sometimes much bigger crowds, especially when there was a second attempt to kill him a few weeks later, where literally a Secret Service agent walking ahead of him on a golf course saw the barrel of an AK-47 poke out of a bush. And if he hadn't, Trump would have been there 4 minutes later and would be dead. So twice in the space of 2 months, Trump came very, very close to being assassinated. And yet it didn't stop him getting back out there. And I do think, when I think back on the whole thing, there were lots of components to why he won, not least the incompetence of the opposition. However, I think regular Americans, and the rest of the world actually, but regular Americans looked at his strength literally under fire, and his resilience and his determination to keep pounding on. I think they looked at that and thought, you know what, after everything that's been thrown at him, the weaponizing of the justice system, literal attempts to kill him, and all the rest of it, look at him, he's still pounding on. And it's a really admirable quality in a man, right?
Absolutely. Well, and, you know, you pointed out that it wasn't only the fact that he immediately leapt up on stage and basically said, go to hell, you're not stopping me.
Yeah.
But then also that he continued to speak and didn't take, what would you say, even perhaps warranted precautions. It's the perfect thing to do psychologically, because if you shrink away in consequence of that threat, you live in fear for the rest of your life. And Trump's determination was obviously, no matter what, I won't live in fear. And that's the same decision Job makes, by the way, in the book of Job. It's a decision not to lose faith and not to live in fear, no matter what, right? No matter what. And that is a manifestation of the spirit that is indomitable. And I think that is a reflection of the image of God.
Yeah.
And so,
you know, Jordan,
I don't think the divine providence with regards to Trump wasn't the fact that he turned his head at the proper moment. The divine providence with regard to Trump was that he jumped up immediately afterwards and said, "You're not stopping me."
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree.